The following podcast is brought to you by Stammond Group and Stammond Consulting. Visit us at www.stammond.com to find out more. Hello everyone, this is Raj from Stammond Group and Stammond Consulting. As you probably already know, Stammond Group is centered in the heart of Asia, but I'm very pleased today to be having a guest who is joining me all the way from London, England, a very good friend of mine, Prajesh Patel, who works in the wealth management industry. I've invited him on the podcast today to give more perspective on emotional intelligence in this specific industry, and also to sort of just ask him a couple questions. And Prajesh, I think it would be a great way to start by maybe asking you why you joined wealth management, what motivates you to do what you do, and what are your future plans?
Hello, Diraj. Thank you very much for having me on the show. It's a pleasure. Just to let everyone know, I met Diraj in Singapore while I was doing my exchange year abroad for 1 year. So we studied together at NTU, and after that year I returned to London, finished off my degree, and I've been working in the wealth management industry now for just over a year. So the wealth management is the service provided to people to help them achieve their financial goals. So it's financial advice, effectively. But it goes a lot deeper than just financial advice. There's a lot of different avenues involved. So, for example, retirement planning, estate planning, and protection, assets or income protection, for example. I've wanted to work in wealth management for two reasons. One is the technicality involved of building the right solution for the clients. So as mentioned before, there's a lot of different avenues to look at when building a solution for the client, and that level of complexity and analysis involved is very interesting and exciting. Secondly, and more importantly, I have a passion of working with people. The client and the advisor relationship is the most important relationship in this industry, and a client will essentially choose an advisor because he gets along with him. There's a lot of other factors around that, so being the best solution, being affordable and cost effective as well, but the client essentially needs to get on with the advisor, and that's where emotional intelligence comes in. For the advisor to be aware of what the client's needs are before the client even says them, for example, or to say what the client wants before the client even knows that that's what he wants. So that's a lot of social and emotional intelligence. That's where it's required, and we'll touch upon that later. I'm motivated to work in wealth management principally because I want to help people, and there's for other people there's lots of different factors involved. So whether that's the compensation or status, but for me, the number one priority is helping people, and this is a good industry to help people in because the tax and regulation rules in the UK are so incredibly complicated and is subject to change all the time. In fact, you could argue that this industry is built on that premise of people just simply don't understand the rules, and they don't have the time or capacity to manage their wealth effectively. So that's where we come in as a financial advisor. With regards to my future plans, I would love to come back to Asia. And Diraj, we've both travelled to Japan together, and we both know how much I love that country. And after you went back to Singapore, I went on to travel in China, and I loved that country just as much. And I'll talk about Shanghai since we have an office there. The the different way of doing business, the culture, the people, the language is what excites me about Asia, about Shanghai and Japan in particular. And I'd love to go back to that. And touching upon the wealth management side, there aren't many financial advisors in Shanghai, and it's an unregulated, immature market. So be able to come there will be an enormous challenge, but it will be a very exciting challenge at the same time. And there is a large amount of unmanaged wealth, and there's a number of entrepreneurs coming up in Shanghai who don't know how to manage their money, and so that's where I can step in and help them out. So yeah, that's the dream, to work in that country one day.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Prajesh. I think that the audience definitely got to know a lot about you and also about how friendship and how he started, so that's always great. You shared a lot about your passion of working with people, and that's how that motivated you. Besides the technical aspects of wealth management, you also shared a very interesting point, almost like a crystal ball, if I might, about how the advisor needs to know the needs of the client before even the client himself or herself knows what they want. And I think the last really interesting point you touched upon was, your travels in Japan and China, and your Shanghai office experiences. Also, how you say that eventually you might think about moving there, and that it would still be an enormous challenge, right? Because there's a different culture, language, and people. And that really is a great sort of way to sort of weave into our next question, because I think no matter where you are in the globe, today you're in England, I'm here in Singapore, and you're thinking about moving to China. I mean, wherever we go, there is a common thread of the fact that we're all still human beings. We feel, we hurt, there's that emotion, and I find that emotional intelligence in that way plays an important part, I think, no matter what culture, language you come from. So I mean that's really what my second question be based about. I think that you're also a young gentleman. You probably have a unique perspective on working with people. So what are the challenges that you face in your job currently? What do you think are the reasons for this? And could you give us maybe a specific example on how EQ helped you deal with a difficult situation in your line of work?
Before I answer this question, let's briefly define what emotional intelligence is. So, according to Daniel Goldman, he boils EQ down to 5 main points. Number 1 is self-awareness, so being aware of your own emotions. Number 2 is managing these emotions. Number 3 is using these emotions to motivate yourself. And the last 2 relate to interpersonal interaction. So number 4 is empathy, which is essentially being aware of other people's emotions. And number 5 is handling relationships, which is essentially influencing and managing emotions in other people as well. Now, in my line of work, I have to book meetings for the advisors that work at my practice, and I do this by cold calling institutions like banks, for example. Now, our system works on a bonus structure, so we're set a target of having to book 30 meetings per calendar quarter, and if we achieve 30, we get the bonus. And if we achieve more than 30, then there's an increasing bonus. However, below 30, there is no bonus. So a trainee has to get 30 in a quarter. Now, I started cold calling in the last quarter of 2016. So that was October, November, December, running up to the new year. During the whole quarter, I was struggling to find my feet. I hadn't cold called before. I didn't know the ins and outs, the techniques. I was still getting used to the script over the quarter, and it the it became very difficult towards the end of that quarter, as I was getting very close to achieving my target. But since it was December, a lot of people that I was cold calling were saying, if they were interested, they were saying, "Oh, great! That that meeting sounds great, but it's Christmas, it's New Year now. Let's have the meeting in January." Now that's fine for my next quarter, but for this quarter, it's not. Especially with being so close to achieving my target. So you can imagine towards the end, it was very stressful for me, making 120 plus phone calls per day, being faced with voicemail, being faced with huge amounts of rejection, and then the odd one or two people who were interested, they were saying, "Let's meet in January." So you can imagine how stressed and how challenging that was emotionally for me to motivate myself to just pick up the phone and just call as many people as I can till I'd book a meeting so I could hit my target and I could get paid. Now, how does this relate to emotional intelligence? So firstly, being self-aware of the emotions that I was feeling. I'd like to use an example that Eckhart Tolle talks about in his book, The Power of Now. He talks about being the watcher on the wall. So in your mind, you observe the emotions rather than identifying yourself with those emotions. So for example, instead of saying to myself, "I am unhappy, I am stressed," which is identification with the emotion, it's better to say, "Oh, there's unhappiness here, there's stress here." I separate myself from the emotion, and this disidentification with the emotion makes it easier to let go of the emotion, which leads me on to my second point of managing emotions. So for me, the best way to manage unhappiness and stress is to let go of it. Now, I meditate every day, and this helps a huge amount with letting go of bad emotions. So during my meditation in the morning, I specifically focus on the breath, and whenever I do get stressed or unhappy during the day, I come back to the breath and I watch the emotion fade away. Now, of course, the brain is very active. It wants to think a lot, and a lot of the time it does come back to the thoughts of being unhappy and being stressed and thinking, "Oh, I need to hit my target. I need to call so many people." As soon as that thought comes back, I realize, oh, there's a thought there. I disidentify myself from it, and I come back to the breath. I watch the emotion fade away, and I'm present again. So essentially with meditation, it's enjoying the silence and enjoying the stillness of the breath. And that's how I manage those emotions. Now, lastly, self-motivation. Now, the last quarter the first quarter that I started calling, I missed out on my target, and by only 1 or 2 meetings, and I didn't get the bonus for that quarter, which was a huge kick in the teeth for me, for doing all of that hard work, all of that calling, and not getting paid for it. The feeling was horrible, and I made a pact with myself that I never wanted to feel like that again. So I learnt my lesson. I improved my craft, I improved the script, I improved the way I delivered the script, my tonality on the phone. I improved my knowledge so I could address queries from clients on the phone better. And most importantly, I increased the number of calls I made a day. And I never missed out on the target again. In fact, I beat the office record for the number of meetings met in the second quarter of this year. So who knows if I would have achieved that if I hadn't failed in my first quarter of calling.
Wow. Well, first of all, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that if you ever do need a guru in your life, Guru Prajesh is definitely around. He's giving us a lot of good advice on breathing, meditation, jokes aside. Praj, I really liked how you framed everything according to Daniel Goleman's principles. How you sort of looked at it through that lens. It was really interesting. And kudos to you, man. You faced huge amounts of rejection on a daily basis. I remember you saying that, you're really stressed out doing 120 plus phone calls a day. I mean, I can't even imagine, doing 120 phone calls a day, man. That's just really crazy. And plus also you started off with the difficulties, like you said, picking up the phone, calling somebody you don't know. You're always going to face that initial hesitation. So great on you for doing that. I thought you brought up some really good points. The idea about the watcher on the wall and watching your emotions as a bystander, disidentifying with that emotion, managing it, letting go of unhappiness. And the meditation part was very interesting. I myself also practice meditation, as I'm sure many of us do. And it's really about focusing on the breath, like you mentioned. And so yeah, I thought that was a great answer. And that kind of sort of takes me to my last question, which really has to do with really changing the gears here. We've talked more about, specifically about you, your story, your life, your daily work. But I'm going to just ask you to peer a little bit in the future now, because we're going to talk a little bit about artificial intelligence. And I'm sure you hear about it every day in the news. In the coming age of artificial intelligence, there are way more technology products being released that can help replace or help human interaction in real time. For instance, there's now software technology out there that gives real-time conversational guidance, meaning that it detects human signals and provides advice on improving the quality of the interaction during a phone call. So for instance, like for someone like yourself, you would have a software in front of you telling you to slow your speech down or to change your tone or to try and connect more with the person you're calling. So that's really interesting. And of course, this technology is not perfect and may not ever be, but do you feel that you could ever be replaced by a machine or software? Do you ever see that, you being completely just sort of taken out of the equation?
Well, thank you very much, Diraj, for calling me a guru. I'm certainly not one because I'm still learning myself. But for those listeners out there who do want to start meditation, I highly recommend this app called Headspace. I've been doing it for almost 4 years now, and it's been hands down one of the best investments I've made ever, because it's definitely changed my life. Consistently doing guided meditation through that app. Don't worry, I'm not being paid by Headspace or anything. I'm just doing this off my own back because it's such an excellent app. So that's Headspace, by the way. Now, to come to your question, will I ever be replaced by a robot? The simple answer is no. Well, I hope not, otherwise I'll be out of a job. And the reason why I say no is for a few reasons. Number one is it's very important to have face-to-face interaction with clients. Going back on Daniel Goleman's 5 points, the last two, empathy and handling, managing relationships, is something that humans are able to do. The ability to sit down with a client, to listen, to understand and build a trusting relationship with a client is very important, and this can only be done between humans. So if we can ever program a robot to feel emotions, be aware of other emotions, and be able to be emotionally intelligent, essentially, then yes, I can be replaced by a robot. But I really don't see this happening anytime soon. I can't imagine how one goes about programming that into a robot. There is robo-advice available in the market at the moment, which is essentially a digital platform that collects information from clients about their financial situation. It does this through an online survey, and it then uses the answers from the survey alongside other data to offer advice and automatically invest the client's assets. Companies are offering this already. For example, UBS recently launched the Smart Wealth platform. Other companies are developing in this area, and I think it only appeals to those who have simpler financial affairs and have a smaller sum of wealth to invest. But for example, with larger high net worth individuals who, for example, have international tax planning issues, which can be incredibly complicated, that's something a robot certainly can't do at the moment. Lastly, technology in finance is growing very rapidly, and Diraj, I'm sure you've heard of, and I'm sure many of the listeners have also heard of fintech, and obviously it's making big waves in the industry in terms of its innovations and the consequences of those. Bitcoin, for example, and blockchain. I think it's very important for wealth managers to keep on top of upcoming tech trends and to incorporate new technology to enhance their business offering. So, for example, streamlining back-end processes to make admin work more efficient, but also on the front end, for example, to enable clients to see their portfolios online and to interact with their advisor through the internet, which of course exists already. So, for example, Skype, but also login platforms where people can log in and see their portfolios online. Further on, in terms of more advanced things to do, there is software solutions that have been around that helps the advisor put in the information of the client, their financial goals, the current situation, and it will show the best way to achieve those goals, what a client needs to save over a period of time, for example. All of that software is available, and that will develop into the future. So I think it's very important for wealth managers to keep on top of those trends.
Yes, and keep on top of those trends. Indeed, we shall. Just like the finance industry that you work in, a lot of industries are facing some sort of transformational change that really comes about with the introduction of new technology. You talked about blockchain. You talked about, fintech, and it's the same even in industries like cybersecurity, for instance. Threats are coming in so often and in so many different forms that it's really hard for a human being to keep up, and it's absolutely essential now that we have machines fighting against machines. We're no longer in an age of slow cyber attacks. So absolutely right, Braj. We all fear that one day robots will take over, but of course there's some things that robots can do that that humans may not be able to do as quickly, but there's some things that humans can do that machines probably can't. Maybe I'm a little biased, but anyway, I really want to thank you for taking the time today to really have a chat with us, Praj. I think the thoughts and experience that you shared with us is really wise beyond your years, and I really want to thank you again for taking the time to just sit down with us and have a chat. I'm pretty sure that the listeners definitely appreciate having you on the show. Once again, if you would like to find out more about the company, you can visit us at www.stammond.com. This has been a production of Stammond Group and Stammond Consulting, based here in Singapore. Thank you very much, everyone, for listening, and until next time, goodbye.